Hi subscribers and welcome back to the channel. Today we're joined by our senior financial advisor Jonathan Laws, who's joining us from Greenwich this morning. Jonathan, how are you?
I'm not bad at all. The weather's not too bad here for the first time in a while, so yeah, feeling chipper.
Very good. So Jonathan, the topic I want to berate you over today is, can I transfer QROPS back to the UK and SIPP versus QROPS in effect? So John, if you could start off by giving a baseline of what is a QROPS and what is a SIPP?
Yeah, so I'll start with a SIPP. So a SIPP stands for Self-Invested Personal Pension. Now, a SIPP is a UK pension scheme. They're all housed in the UK. They're all regulated in the UK with administrators and all the rest of it, all regulated and administrated in the UK. And what a SIPP is effectively is a very, very flexible pension scheme that can invest in all sorts of things that your typical workplace scheme just can't. You know, there's not typically a fixed fund range, or certainly not a small fixed fund range. You know, there's also, in theory, the potential for commercial property, although most of the time that's inadvisable. There's also the ability to have more autonomy. You don't have to deal with the employer. So that's what a SIPP is. You know, a lot of times when people transfer out of a workplace pension, whether they live abroad or they live in the UK, they will be transferring to a SIPP. So when you see the likes of AJ Bell, Novia, Hargreaves Lansdown, all the rest of it, those are SIPPs, and they're very flexible. Now, the QROPS stands for a Qualified Recognised Overseas Pension Scheme. Now, a QROPS is an overseas pension scheme that is purpose-built and designed to receive a UK pension transfer. So there's actually no such thing. A QROPS is not like a SIPP. It's not like a special type of pension. It's just a designation given to a pension scheme that meets certain rules in order to receive a UK pension. And those rules are effectively, does it walk and talk a lot like a UK pension? Making sure you can't access it until the same age as a UK pension. You can't invest in property. You can't, residential property. You can't do this. You can't access it early. You can't get special tax breaks and all the rest of it. So that's what a QROPS is. QROPS can be housed anywhere. They are all around the world. There are QROPS in Australia, where a lot of the superannuation funds, they have all there, which is like Australia's version of pensions or workplace pensions can be designated the QROPS. You have some in Canada, but the vast majority, when people are talking about QROPS, they are very often talking about either Malta or Gibraltar, where QROPS are mainly housed for those moving abroad to Europe and who want to transfer their UK pension to, so they can get some more flexibility and access from it than they could perhaps from their current existing pension scheme in the UK.
So on that point then, John, thank you for clarification of both. If our viewers have found this video, I'm more than certain that you've got a QROPS and you're planning to transfer it back to the UK. So my next question for John is, what are the possible advantages of transferring a QROPS back to the UK?
Yeah, so what you'll very likely find is, especially if you already have a QROPS and you're resident of the EU or the EEA, back when you did your original transfer, the idea of this kind of QROPS versus SIPP really wasn't an option, because if you lived overseas and you wanted to withdraw to a foreign bank account and you wanted to stick it in euro or whatever, a QROPS was your only option. So, the hindsight bias is great, but in reality, that was very likely your only option or was, the standard option at the time. Now, for those who, now we developed, as the industry's progressed, we now have SIPPs, or what's known as international SIPPs. Now, a bit of a misnomer. The word international doesn't mean the SIPP's overseas or international. What it really means is that the SIPP provider, which is a UK regulated firm, it is willing and able to take on non-UK resident clients and specialise it, whereas pretty much all your UK pension scheme providers now, your big mainstream SIPP providers, apart from one or two, have basically said no to new overseas business with a couple of exceptions. So that's just to put it in context. So you're thinking, oh God, I really should have been in a SIPP in the first place. Yes, if you did the transfer a couple of years ago, very possible. But if you did this, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, don't be too angry or be angry at the advisor, because it's very likely that was your only option. So, the big advantages obviously are costs. Typically speaking, these international SIPPs will have pretty much 99% of the benefits of a QROPS. Now, there are some circumstances where that's different, and there might be certain tax breaks, or if you live in a country like Australia, their rules are very different in terms of what a QROPS can do over a SIPP, from a taxation point of view and access point of view. But in reality, the big point is costs. So, an international SIPP will do FX. It'll pay out to a foreign bank account. You can invest in multiple currencies. You can do this, you can do that. And a lot of those benefits that QROPS originally had have been mitigated by the fact that an international SIPP can do most of it. Again, it's not a 100% reason to want to use a SIPP over a QROPS, and there are still good reasons, such as having a very large pension and not wanting to think about lifetime allowance coming back in the future. There's other types of talk about certain amounts of additional tax-free cash that might be possible. A good article in the Financial Times Advisor a couple of weeks ago on that, which is very interesting reading from a couple of tax experts. That's kind of what a SIPP versus QROPS looks like. And the advantages obviously is whilst the QROPS can use FCA regulated platforms and can facilitate really good advice, unfortunately they've been used rather nefariously by a lot of people to take advantage of clients, and it's not as strict. There aren't as many rules and costs and investment types and structures. So a UK pension, the UK SIPP will typically be a lot more secure and regulated than a QROPS will, even if a QROPS can be used in a very good manner by the more scrupulous advisors out there.
So you raised a good point about cost there. In your experience of working with clients and having completed existing QROPS, typically Malta or a lot of Gibraltar-based QROPS recently, back to the UK, could you give our viewers a breakdown of some of the cost differentials you see? First of all, just talking directly about the trustees, so just the QROP and the SIPP cost, but also the wider part of the pie. What type of fees and charges you normally see on the underlying portfolio inside of QROPS in comparison to, say, working with a SIPP in the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's two real aspects to it. The first is, a pension is just a wrapper. You can't, if you've got a SIPP, great, you can't invest with it. You've got to have something inside the SIPP to invest. Typically, that would be a type of brokerage account, especially if the UK residents are using one of the main accounts. But you're in a QROPS, it's just a wrapper and you've got to have an investment option. But the problem with QROPS is a lot of them are put into bonds unnecessarily. And that's where, unfortunately, a lot of the fees can come from. So from an actual wrapper point of view, you might pay 200 quid, 220 quid, whatever it is for a UK SIPP for just the wrapper administration. For some of the providers out there, and especially the ones we use, whereas you might pay £750 setup and £1,000 or £1,500 a year in a QROPS. And you can obviously see those figures, especially if you've got a smaller pension, can really add up. And what are you actually getting for that additional money? Then the other aspects are the actual investment platform or bond inside inside the pension, and that's really where the real fees can come. And again, because the SIPPs are typically more heavily regulated, especially these days with the new pension transfer rules that came out in November 2021, a lot of the advice given prior to that isn't actually that materially different to what you saw in a QROP. So a lot of people in a bond might have paid loads of commission on the way in. It wasn't very well disclosed. The advisor kind of didn't do a very good job, whether intentionally or not. I'll leave that to you to decide, about the total fees payable, and maybe there were certain types of funds that were paying back trail and comms to the advisor, or they might have had exit penalties or initial fees to access them. That again was another form of commission. Again, all sorts of arrangements that are just not possible in the modern regulated UK SIPP. So that's where the real costs can come. Yes, you've got the wrapper costs, which is usually a fixed fee, which can be substantial and unnecessary. But a QROPS will often, unfortunately, have been utilised by unscrupulously to take advantage and charge you very high fees. Again, though, they were doing this. This happened to a lot of you in UK SIPPs. A lot of SIPPs were used to this effect to do it, but it is more common in QROPS.
And to that point then, John, so say out of the last 20 clients you spoke with who came through with an existing QROPS, as I said, normally in Malta or Gibraltar are the big two where people are coming to complete transfer outs of, it seems. What would you say are the biggest driving factors for these people? What are they saying to you? What are their concerns? What are their reasons for wanting to transfer back to the UK before you even start chatting or say anything to them? What are they saying to you?
Yes, so the big one is usually costs. They'll have been put into, the commission structure, and they'll still be paying it back, and they'll still have loads of extra penalties, and they'll be thinking to themselves, heck, why am I paying a financial advisor as well? On top of it, 1% a year, I never speak to him. He doesn't really add any value. His investments are rubbish. His fees are really high. I've read all sorts of horror stories about QROPS online. My pot's not as big, I don't think, to justify the fees, and the lifetime allowance is gone, so why am I paying these fees? Now, the irony is, a lot of times when that comes to us and they do it, yeah, they're right, we can definitely help reduce the fees substantially, but one of the huge angles they're missing it is, especially, in some schemes, especially the older schemes, and especially you see in Gibraltar, there are very obscure access rules, death benefit rules. A lot of people think, I pass on, my wife's going to get my pension. A lot of these schemes, your wife will get it, but it'll be a giant taxable lump sum. It won't be, like a modern pension where you can, scrub out your name, stick your wife's name or your kid's name there, and they take it over. So a lot of people will come to us for costs and not actually realise there are loads of other additional potential benefits to looking at a different option.
Yeah. Okay. Understood. So obviously we've talked about cost quite a bit. That was obviously next on my list, so you've already covered that. So I'll jump to the next one. What are the fees for transferring a QROPS back to the UK with Cameron James?
Yeah. So one of the things with QROPS, if you are looking to transfer, and again, not to be too cynical, but one of the reasons why QROPS are overused is they're actually much more challenging to get back into a UK pension. All your big mainstream providers don't accept overseas transfers in. So if you want to get your QROPS back into a UK pension, it's all but certain you're going to need to use the services of another financial advisor. Again, you need to make sure that financial advisor is locally regulated, understands what they're doing, has terms of business with QROPS, isn't transferring you back and actually you realise you should have stayed or moved to another QROPS. So with Cameron James, it's the fees are the same, same fees we have for any other types of pension transfer or investment. So again, all visible on our website. The typical might be, it's between 3, 2 and 1%. Typically with QROPS clients, we see a larger, so it's closer to 2, perhaps at 1%. And then again, ongoing fees apply as well, because as if you watch the channel, we don't do transaction advice at Cameron James. We only work with people who intend to be very long-term clients. Okay, it's a commercial aspect. Transaction is very bad for business, staying afloat, but also it's the way we want to work and the type of clients we want to work with. So it's standard, but it is you will find out and figure out why the fees are there, because it is a slog. There is so much scrutiny. There is so much to unwind and unpack with QROPS, and to decipher and figure out, what's what, to actually get it back into it. It isn't actually that far away in terms of transfer length of time as it would for those of you who ever did a defined benefit pension transfer recently. You're looking at 3 to 6 months at least to do it. So, it is money well spent.
Indeed. So could you talk about what are the possible tax implications of a QROPS pension transfer back to the UK?
Yeah, again, so obviously we're not tax advisors. We're not financial advisors. We're not tax advisors. So again, you perhaps want independent tax advice, or likely want independent tax advice when you're looking at a transfer, especially if you've got more complex needs, or loads and loads, you've got money coming out of your ears or whatnot. But typically, you're inside a you're inside a pension arrangement. There's not going to be any sort of tax implications on the transfer. Can be different for some countries. When you're looking to go into a QROPS, because of overseas transfer charges, and perhaps some countries like America don't look favourably on Maltese pensions or whatnot. But in reality, a lot of times, the real value and the real rationale to use a QROPS is all about the lifetime allowance. And yes, it's been abolished, but there's all talk about it coming back. So in reality, if you're not anywhere near the old lifetime allowance, the benefits of a QROPS are very limited, except for some unique circumstances. And again, that's where proper, thorough, independent tax advice should be sought. But for most people, if you're nowhere near the old lifetime allowance limit, 1.0731 million or whatever your lifetime allowance, if you had any sort of protection was, there is just very limited justification for you to be staying in the QROPS, and the tax implications are just not there.
Yeah, understood. And what benefits might a client lose by transferring a QROPS back to the UK?
Again, there's all this talk about, if you stay in QROPS for a certain amount of time, you can get an extra tax-free cash lump sum. But again, in our experience, QROPS, any kind of income from a QROPS is fully taxable in your local country. So, getting an extra gross amount of tax payable is redundant, because you're going to be paying tax on it anyway. So, that kind of argument we've always found a bit flimsy. So there's no kind of aspect there. But if you've got lifetime allowance potential issues, you've got £1 million pension and you're not accessing it for a very long time, and the lifetime allowance might come back, transferring back to a SIPP might be shooting yourself in the foot, because you might be subjecting yourself to an excess lifetime allowance charge down the road, and then those fees you might be saving are kind of blown out of the water by the additional tax penalty you might be paying. So again, this is where the value of a proper financial advisor comes in, because they're only going to advise you to transfer out of a QROPS if there's very good justifications for doing so. And again, a lot of times it might be the case that in reality you don't want to transfer out of the QROPS or out of a QROPS structure. You want to move to a better QROPS provider with better death benefit terms or better access. You might want to move to Malta, because one of the big things between Malta and Gibraltar is Gibraltar has your old, you remember the old cap drawdown days where you can access it and it's one, use it or lose it, and then you've got limits on how much you can draw down, whereas Malta is a much more flexible jurisdiction for access and all the rest of it. So again, you need proper comprehensive advice, because it doesn't just mean, it's cheaper, let's do it, because you might be shooting yourself in the foot, by giving up things you didn't realize you were, potentially going to benefit from.
Yes, and what are the QROPS rules in regards to the 10 years rule?
Yeah, so again, this is where tax advice comes in, but there's certain rules about, you have to be lived overseas for a certain period of time before you can access your pension, otherwise you're subject to UK taxation. But again, in practice, if you're no longer UK tax resident and you've got, you've moved abroad and you're getting taxed in your local country, those rules are almost redundant, because you're not going to be paying tax anyway, you'll just be able to reclaim it. So again, though, typically with a QROPS, you are looking, for the long term and looking to move abroad. What they'll do is they will look back. So, where that rule comes in, what they don't want is people moving abroad who then go and liquidate their pension, don't pay any lifetime allowance tax, or take advantage of lifetime allowance, or take advantage of a special lump sum arrangement, and then move back to the UK. So what it's really there for is to help claw back people who are trying to kind of almost go on a tax tourism or whatever. I don't know what the exact phrase is to use it, who want to move abroad to do that. They don't want you taking advantage of that. So that's what it is. It's almost like a set of clawback rules. If you're moving to Spain and you access your pension in 3 years and you're never coming back and you never come back, HMRC doesn't care about that. They're worried you do that and then you move straight back to Blighty and you save loads of tax potentially or didn't pay loads of excess charge. So that's what those rules are there for. So that's kind of the way that what those rules are there for.
All right, and finally, to wrap things up, unless any more bonus questions come up, what would be your advice to any of our viewers today who have an existing QROPS, whether it be Malta, Gibraltar, or somewhere else? They're considering to transfer it back to the UK. They want to understand a little bit more. What would be your advice to them in terms of starting that advice journey?
Yeah, so obviously the one thing that's obviously the overarching thing is that you're going to need to use the services of a financial advisor, as they just aren't self-invest mainstream options. They're going to accept it. So that does mean that you're not going to be making any sort of rash decision or transferring without thinking it fully through. You are going to have to go through the full-on advice process, get your suitability report, see what the best options are, or what the options are, and what the best one is, and all the associated costs and charges and comparisons and all the rest of it. So, our view is, get yourself educated, speak to a financial advisor. Again, this is, you need to make sure they're locally regulated. Yes, if you're living in the EU and you're thinking, I shouldn't be in this pension, then, most EU advisors dealing with expats are going to be able to deal with QROPS. But, the vast majority of firms who are, FCA regulated, or advisors who are FCA regulated, who have no sort of regulation or knowledge or experience or dealings with overseas clients, are very unlikely, to have terms of business with QROPS providers, know anything about QROPS advisors, to have insurance to do QROPS advice, or even to just have the risk or stomach to want to do it. And, so you need to make sure, your advisor fully understands QROPS, has all the protections in place. So you're getting properly heavily regulated advice that's insured and protected and whatnot, and you're making a fully informed decision. You've got a full transparent picture of what it is you're giving up and why the new solution or pension arrangement and whatnot is more suitable.
Yeah, okay, understood. Well, Jonathan, thank you very much for joining on this cold morning, which is getting slightly warmer in the UK. So thank you very much for your time today, Jonathan.
Yeah, you're more than welcome.
And subscribers, as always, the very best thing you can do for our channel, the biggest thank you to me, is if you can hit the subscribe button below. This lets YouTube know that we're decent people doing a good job, delivering free content for people. So please hit that. It's the very best thing you can do to help me with the channel. And as always, take care of your UK pension assets.